Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am here with the distinct honor of being here with Charlie Sidoti. Charlie and I have become very good friends over the last few months. He is the executive director of InnSure. I do have to say, Charlie has a great sense of humor, and I attended one of his conferences, had to be one of the best conferences I've attended in many, many years. It's just the distinguished
Thank you.
speakers and just really phenomenal. So I would just call that out. Charlie has an unbelievable background. He has an engineering background. He's currently the executive director of InnSure, which is a conglomeration of putting together government, private industry, and the nonprofit world within the insurance industry, playing in the world of Insurtech, playing in the world of data, playing in the world of technology, and building this major gap with a key focus really on is climate insurance. So, Charlie, it's an absolute pleasure you being here with us at our podcast at Oz Digital Consulting. So, welcome.
Thank you very much, and we definitely have become good friends over this recent period since we met not too long ago. We're super excited to be here on the podcast. We're super excited to start looking for ways to work together with Oz. And I'm looking forward to the next 30 45 minutes to talk about what we're doing, what you guys are doing.
Yeah, so I mean, so let's just talk about your background, my friend, right?
Yeah,
You have like a really, I mean, I basically have your LinkedIn approach here, right? But you've got like some really cool stuff. Like you're teaching at, you're an adjunct professor at Massachusetts Maritime Academy. I know you're doing some really great stuff with Northeastern. I know you're in the Boston area. You're the executive director of InnSure. I mean, so how, tell us about yourself. I mean, your unbelievable background here. It's like your LinkedIn is like 20 pages.
I'll go all the way back to the origin, how the heck I got into insurance. I know that's a fun story. I've taught courses at Mass Maritime. My undergrad was at Mass Maritime, and I was studying to be a marine engineer to work on a ship, merchant marine. And this company at the time, St. Paul Companies, which is now part of Travelers Insurance, was interviewing. And quite frankly, I took an interview. They were the first company interviewing. I had no intention of going into insurance. Similar to when I talk to students today, they don't know much about insurance. They're like, I'm not going into insurance. But between the interview and literally it was like within a few days, Massachusetts Maritime is right on the Cape Cod Canal, and a ship sunk literally at the edge of campus, blocking the canal. And the whole school was out there like, oh my God, what is going on? It's sticking up.
Was this a big ship or like?
Yeah, it was a fishing vessel. It was probably a couple 100 feet. It was a big deal. And there was a guy with a clipboard who was in a suit, and I was like, who's that? What's he doing? So I went and talked to him. And he was a claims person. He was like representing the insurance company, trying to figure out how to salvage and minimize the cost. And I just started talking to him about insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing I know, I went into my second interview with a lot of questions. And long story short, I ended up working with St. Paul Companies originally as an ocean marine underwriter. But once I got there was a bunch of property engineers from Factory Mutual who just knew that I had an engineering background and that I was like 21 years old. And they could train me everything I needed to know about insurance. They wanted an engineer. So they kind of adopted me, and I went through, I spent 15 years at St. Paul Companies, and then 10 years running the consulting groups at One Beacon Insurance. And then I went to, worked on startups for 10 years, all mostly analytics. And during that period, I was also on the board, when I was at One Beacon, I was on the board of directors for the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, which was really interesting because they're a nonprofit, they're insurance industry supported, and they're really focused on kind of the noble Like, how does the insurance industry help the world? How does it make it more resilient? They were doing research around, and they still do a lot of research
Yeah.
around catastrophes and wind and stuff like that.
Wow. So let me retract a second. So you're about 20, 21. You're in college. You're out on the water at Cape Cod, beautiful Cape Cod. There's this fishing vessel that sunk, and it changed your life.
Yeah.
Because a guy in a suit with a clipboard saying, "What the hell happened here? What are you doing?" As the canal is basically closed because this fishing vessel sunk.
Clearly,
that's the reason why we're here today talking to you, huh, Charlie?
Yeah, clearly I'm impulsive, and I kind of went to the engineering group. One, because they really did want me, but two, they were like, I was like, "Is there more money involved?" And they said no, but we'll give you a company car. And I was like, "All right,
all right, sure, hey, I'll take it."
Yeah.
So from that moment, right, you basically really understood the fact that there's more to insurance than meets the eye. Because I will tell you, just as you are a professor, I also teach, and I have to tell you, in the last right after your conference, I have to tell my students, I said, look, at Columbia and NYU, I said, look, I would never recommend going into the insurance business because you're all pretty technical and you want to do really cool stuff. And historically, the insurance business is pretty old, right? It's basically belt and suspenders. But what's really happening now, it's really an exciting time in terms of what's going on with insurance and climate. And your background is so well suited for that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just from your engineering background and then getting your St. Paul insurance background for 20 years, and then marrying it up with your startup background. I mean, tell us more about that.
Yeah, it's and I at Northeastern I do a lot of work with students, and it's analytics heavy, and you're right, they all come in with like, I'd rather work for Amazon. But when you compare and I would love Amazon, don't get me wrong, but
Sure.
E-commerce versus insurance is, it's been 40 years of catastrophe modeling, which is really hard. And now it's like, okay, well, catastrophe modeling isn't even enough, because now you have to overlay like climate modeling, climate change models, which are really complicated too, on top of it. So from a data science perspective, it really is cutting edge stuff.
Oh yeah, I teach at Columbia their applied analytics program. I mean, this is unbelievable. I mean, when we first met you were telling about the data sets that you have. I mean, insurance and climate, most people don't realize that connection. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, even people in the industry don't. And we're kind of so actually, let me just start by saying, like, InnSure is a nonprofit, and you kind of alluded to it earlier. Our mission is to foster innovation in insurance, and we have a very heavy focus on catalyzing we like to say a quick, bold, and decisive insurance industry response to climate change. I mean, it is the innovation in the industry for the next decade. It's going to be very much focused on climate change is going to touch every aspect of how insurance functions. We think there's $100 billion new insurance market related to some of these things. And it's not easy stuff. It has big implications for society. You look at Ian, the hurricane that kind of came through Florida, a large percentage, probably 80 or 90%, did not have flood coverage. And that's a bad thing. And I feel like that's a market failure of the industry to back away like that. It dumps it on governments and the policyholders. And that's not the best way to pay for these impacts of climate change. There's, the people who had insurance is much more efficient, much more effective at the catastrophe type things, and the industry needs to figure out how to do them better.
So you telling us that the travel industry should really be totally involved in data analytics, and climate. Is that what you're telling us?
The insurance industry, yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. I think one, it is you were right earlier, it's a 400-year-old industry, and parts of it operate very much
Mhm.
like Lloyd's did at the
Yeah.
coffee house 400 years ago. Their deals, they get put together by people.
Mhm.
But it is, a lot of the data-driven kind of world that we talk about today and is mostly
Mhm.
associated with an Amazon or a Facebook or a
Mhm.
Tesla. A
Mhm.
lot of that started hundreds of years ago with the insurance
Right.
industry.
Mhm.
And the industry, I think, has unique capabilities that can help the world better deal with both the impacts of climate change and also the transition to a low carbon economy, which
Mhm.
is starting to happen faster. It's accelerating. You see more, I think this week is COP27 is starting in Egypt, and
Mhm.
the movement has gotten legs, and it's affecting the insurance industry, and it presents challenges to the insurance industry. It presents huge opportunities to the insurance
Mhm.
industry
Mhm.
from a
Mhm.
business perspective, and our mission is really to help the industry understand both the challenges, the risks, and the opportunities, and respond to them in
Mhm.
ways that and I think we'll probably talk about doing well
Yeah.
and doing good.
So
There's
let
real
me just jump in. So it's just for our audience. So how did Insure work, right? So there's a huge need for it, right? So just step back a bit, like,
yeah.
so where and when did this come to you to start Insure to really help the insurance industry in this idea of data, climate, fintech, Insurtech, and putting government, nonprofits, and for-profit businesses together, Charlie? How did this all come to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I started, I was working on some startups out of a place called Cambridge Innovation Center.
Hmm.
Cambridge Innovation Center grew out of MIT. They're headquartered in Kendall Square. They're about 20-year-olds. At their core, they're an incubator and they have real estate. They have about 1 million square feet around the globe, a couple
Hmm.
100,000, probably 400,000 in Massachusetts.
Hmm.
And what they do is they cater to entrepreneurs. And
Hmm.
I was one of those entrepreneurs working at
Well.
a startup at CIC.
Mhm.
And they've created a number of innovation hubs focused on different industries and different issues. The
Mhm.
first one was Venture Cafe, which is it's a nonprofit designed to help entrepreneurs do
Mhm.
business. And
Mhm.
they have a meetup every week, and they usually
Mhm.
got, pre-pandemic, they were getting a couple hundred people every Thursday.
Wow.
And we were doing some events on
Mm.
insurance, and we ran into Tim Rowe, the founder of CIC, and he said, "Look, why
Mhm.
don't we give you Venture Cafe for a night? Let's collaborate to do an Insurtech night
Mm.
and see what we can do." And we got 500 people there.
Wow.
And so we that led us to launch InnSure. We had a different name at the time, and we were just
What was it?
focused
What was
on
the other name?
it was innovation underwriters. And there was some trademark issues that we
Yeah,
ended
okay.
up not having. And we like the name InnSure better
Yeah,
anyway.
it shows great. Yeah.
Yeah, so we launched InnSure as a nonprofit to essentially foster innovation in insurance, but
Mhm.
we didn't start with the focus on climate risk initially. We had a broad kind of like, digital
Mm.
transformation, but we were brand new, and then the pandemic hit, so events weren't such a good thing and nobody really knew
Yeah.
us. And there was Insurtech Hartford, there was Plug and
Right.
Play, Global Insurance Accelerator, all these other groups that we were.
Mhm.
So our board kind of got together and said, like, what makes us different? What are we going to focus on? And
Mhm.
as we really looked at where the Insurtech dollars were going,
Mhm.
the Insurtech dollars were really going into sales and distribution, and just like digital, like legacy system,
Yeah.
digital transformation. But nothing was really on the product side in terms of what we thought the need was like, we looked at the protection gap. There's this huge
Mm.
gap. I alluded to it with the Florida
Mhm.
flood.
Right.
but the insurance industry has been kind of pulling back from a lot of these kind of evolving, emerging risks, and we're like, that's a big problem for the world,
Yeah.
which we think also presents an opportunity. So we started exploring what could we do uniquely, and the more we got into the climate issues, there's and you sat through the
Sure.
sessions. There's
Yeah.
opportunity after opportunity,
Hmm.
and still the venture kind of Insurtech venture world is talking about it, but most of the money is still going into kind of
Hmm.
distribution, underwriting, kind of other things. But there's definitely a lot of activity at this intersection of insurance, innovation, and climate. And we
Hmm.
think we're, extremely well positioned. For the last 2 years, we've been doing a lot of research and discovery and building relationships
Hmm.
across traditional boundaries to
Right.
really connect to the climate tech world, because they keep
Mhm.
asking, they don't understand insurance doesn't really understand a lot of these new technologies, carbon
Mhm.
capture, sequestration, and a lot of things. So we think we can provide a unique kind of bridge
Mhm.
that will support the innovation that's already
Mhm.
starting to happen, that
Mhm.
needs to happen, and that will happen over the next 10, 20 years.
So let me pick up what you said about in the Florida flooding and everything, right? Because as you know, Oz is located in Florida, digital consulting. But it was interesting. I was reading an article in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal about the floods and the hurricane that came to Florida. It was very interesting because at your conference, the gentleman who spoke, the first your guest speaker, who talked about Bermuda,
Steve
right?
Weinstein, yeah.
Yeah, Steve, yes. And the same hurricane that hit Florida was the same hurricane that hit Bermuda, but no impact in Bermuda, right? It's the same exact hurricane. Okay, great. There's maybe variations in terms of the speed and the force, but can you speak to why that Bermuda survived this and Florida didn't?
I mean, there's a lot of different reasons. I think
Hmm.
so Steve Weinstein, he's the chairman of the Bermuda Development Agency, and he was a chief counsel at Renaissance Reinsurance. He talked a lot about
Hmm.
uh, a lot of the issues in insurance, and we have that video. We can post that with
Sure.
this one. Another person who was at the conference was Natalie Enclade, who's the executive
Hmm.
director of Build Strong.
Hmm.
And kind of one of the things you get to is, there's building codes, there's building code enforcement, and Florida is much better than they were I think it was 1992 when
Hmm.
Andrew came through. All the codes changed, everything kind of was upgraded. And what you're going to
Hmm.
see again is like another kind of iteration of that.
Hmm.
Hopefully, we're cautiously optimistic that some of these uh build strong concepts that
Hmm.
Natalie's group kind of advocates for is will happen before the damaged buildings are actually
Right. Because
rebuilt.
the
Yeah,
key here really is that you're really saying that insurance could be a savior of future hurricanes, right? Because the influence of the insurance policy can dictate to build better buildings by enforcing or influencing or persuading the building code.
absolutely. Insurance has a huge role, and these things kind of bleed across insurance, kind of product issues, public policy issues. And it's easy to say some of these things are public policy. It's
Mhm.
easy to say that these are product issues. It's easy to say that these are customer choices.
Mhm.
But we're at a point now that, like, we all need to figure out how to work together
Mhm.
and think about that big picture that says there is a town in Florida, I think it's
Mhm.
Babcock Ranch is
Mhm.
the name. If I get the name wrong, please
Mhm.
correct me. But that as you described, like Florida
Mhm.
to Bermuda, there are towns in Florida that
Mhm.
they only had a stop sign go down. And
Yes.
and it was, so a lot of these things really are a choice but
Mhm.
it's a choice with a cost, and you can pay
Mhm.
the cost up front and you can pay the cost on the back end. And it's the same with the protection
Mhm.
gap. Like when you have only 10% have insurance, that means it's all going to be paid out of the customer's pocket in the future or through disaster relief, which is
Mhm.
not very efficient. You know, disaster
Right.
relief costs seven to 10 times, I think, of the numbers I've heard. It
Mhm.
costs more if you do it in disaster relief because it happens so much later, and there's
Mhm. Right.
also different mechanisms involved. If you pay for insurance up front, you know, it's cheaper in the long run. And we're working
Mhm.
on some projects around how can you do community embedded insurance. So instead of
Mhm.
paying for disaster relief after the fact, you know, as a community, how can
Mhm.
communities work together to ensure that there's a
Mhm.
minimum level of insurance, just like
Mhm.
minimum level of codes? Insurance is kind of like infrastructure in my mind.
Right. Right. Well, it's funny if that little town that you were talking about, that the hurricane went through it in Florida. Very interesting because basically all that happened to that town was the stop sign fell off. But in their strategy, because when they were talking to the insurance company, they were prepared. They built this community for hurricane, and it basically the insurance companies impacted the design where they had these beautiful ponds, and they look really aesthetically beautiful. However, they were used for the runoff of hurricane water, and the building codes were, far exceeded. Now they were much more expensive. But at the end of the day, the insurance company basically dictated the success of this community because of climate change. I mean, that's pretty impressive that the insurance companies had this influence of the building code. So it really sounds like it's insurance companies to building code to survival of these tragedies with the environment.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the what you described, and I, the only thing I would kind of take issue with
Mhm.
is the ddictated part. The
Yeah,
insurance
well,
industry didn't really dictate, but the collaboration that you talked
okay,
about is
you're nicer
critical.
than me, Charlie.
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I was thinking dictate like, hey, I want the insurance policy, but if you don't do this, I'm not giving you the policy.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I wish it happened that way sometimes. It does, sometimes it doesn't. But it really takes a collaboration that the
Mhm.
town made a choice, the homeowners kind of let these,
Mhm.
because a lot of times people fight the code and they say, well, that's going to
Yeah,
be more expensive. But
yeah.
if you know, it's only more expensive over the shorter time horizon. Over the longer time horizon, and with the hurricane events that are increasingly more frequent, it's actually much cheaper. And that's a
Mm,
lot of the work that we did at IBHS,
right,
was to show that, you know, fortified codes and kind of the build strong approach,
right.
it really is efficient and it's
Mhm.
effective, and it makes a lot of sense, and it's
Mhm.
really just a matter of will and imagination to kind of do
Right.
some of these
And we're
things.
not we're not talking just about the insurance and the environment and housing. We're talking about insurance, this climate change, and all infrastructure. We're talking about roads and buildings, right? So when you look at the decimation of the last hurricane, specifically in Florida, there's things that we have to rethink about that the insurance industry, with their analytics and background, can really suggest some really pretty impressive concepts. It's not like build back what we had, it's build back better with the influence of the insurance agencies to, companies to say, look, we don't want this to happen again, right? I like to say, like, we like to build like the Roman Empire, right? You want to build the aqueduct that would last forever.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. And there's lots of opportunities. The insurance industry has some very unique capabilities around kind of analyzing and assessing these risks. And when you
Mm,
talk to people in the industry, I think they're so close to it sometimes they underestimate the power of the
mm,
industry and the capabilities of the industry. And they focus on like the weak, like, oh, the models aren't quite there yet. We need to do
mhm,
this, we need to do that. And our thought is like there's a lot to do in terms of kind of bringing climate and catastrophe modeling together.
mhm,
There's a lot to do to, like, say, like the models are very good at the hazard, they're very good at the asset, but they don't
mhm,
at these second and third order degree infrastructure
Hmm.
influences into the model. So those are all real innovation
Hmm. Hmm.
opportunities. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there's incredible capabilities about
Hmm.
understanding risk that we take for granted in the industry, that customers really are not getting the signal, or do not understand their risk, that we can bring down to the customer level,
Hmm.
and so that they can make better decisions like that Babcock Ranch, and they
Hmm.
understood it. I'm sure they didn't just say, "Hey, let's have higher codes so we spend money."
Right.
I'm sure there was
Right.
a journey there where they
Hmm.
got to understand the risk, and working
Hmm.
with the insurance industry, working with other experts,
Hmm.
they made a choice, which I think it's going to be a more common choice because people are saying, because
Right.
they're such a great example. Like they're
Yeah.
with
I mean,
proof of concept, and now others will say, "Why didn't we do that?"
right, because it's just so like the interesting thing, if you look at the picture, they're so close to each other, right? You have one
Yeah,
community that survived, you have the other community that just like was decimated, right? It would be interesting to find out the people who actually live in that community, if they had former experiences with their houses being destroyed prior to this, and they said, oh, okay, enough's enough, right? Because that model of what you're trying to do with the insurance industry, we just, we're focused on Florida here, but it goes across the entire United States. I mean, they're at your conference, the lady from Beamer had basically said, if it rains, you need flood insurance. Now, I live on a hill here in Connecticut, right? We're like, so I'm thinking like, wow, we need flood insurance, but it's basically, if it basically rains, you need flood insurance. I mean, can you talk
yeah,
about that?
yeah. I mean, there's flood is kind of a general term.
Hmm.
Flood happens a lot of different ways. There's kind of rising waters, there's surging ocean, there's
Hmm.
like backup stormwater, like things just don't drain fast
Hmm.
enough. So even if you're at the top of the hill, if there's no place for it to go down fast enough,
Hmm.
and that could back up through your like sewer lines and things. So a lot of
Hmm.
things are in that kind of generic term of flood. And I do fault the industry for, like, a lot of these things get engineered at an insurance policy as opposed to
Hmm.
the engineering of the actual kind of
Hmm.
systems. And that, if people don't understand, like, oh, I took the cheaper thing, I got my insurance for half the price.
Right. But what'd
It's
you
like,
get?
well, what did you get? Yeah.
Wow.
And they don't know until after the event happens.
Mhm.
And then it's like, well, this is, insurance is a contract. It's a promise to pay. We entered into an agreement. Those are
Mhm.
the terms of the agreement.
Mhm.
And that is not always, I
Mhm.
understand how it happens and why it
Mhm.
happens. People want a lower price, and that's the means to get there. But
Mhm.
it needs to be more transparent, and they need to
Mhm.
understand, like, we're expecting sometimes unsophisticated kind of buyers to essentially
Right.
be like, like
Yeah.
hedging their kind of risk.
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
a
I mean, most people,
sophisticated
what's this? I mean, in my world, most people hate insurance companies, right? Because
yeah,
it's basically you got to pay, but the model's really weird, right? Because you have to have it for your car, but you don't want to have an accident, right? So you're paying and you feel like you're not getting anything for it. But when you do have an accident, like, okay, thank goodness I got insurance. It's similar, like when you're talking about flood insurance and structural insurance. It's like, yeah, I have to pay for this. But what you really have to, and you make a very valid point, like if you could leverage and harness the power of what you're doing at Insure and the insurance companies to make things better, that you'd really save it if, God forbid, there is another hurricane, that you'll survive this in one tragic event, you made your money back.
yeah. People need to understand the insurance industry can do a much better job, and I'm not a
Hmm.
communications person, but I think they've focused in on their role around risk transfer and the
Hmm.
contract, which is great because risk transfer enables a lot of things. But insurances should be products that transfer risk, but
Hmm.
also services that help people
Hmm.
understand their risk, manage their risk, to
Hmm.
make decisions about what to transfer, what to keep, what to
Hmm.
mitigate. Like, and I
Yeah.
think that piece is given short, it's not the focus of the industry always, and it should be. And I think it's starting to, you see a lot of these Insurtechs that are coming up. They're not necessarily coming up with better contracts. They're coming up with better ways to deliver the contracts, and it's usually the engagement model. And what we're saying is the engagement model is more than just the distribution of the contract. It's actually the services, the mitigation, how you can help people really understand their risk, make smarter decisions about their risk. So there's lots of opportunities.
Right. Tell us more about the InnSure benefits for Insurtech companies, because there's some really interesting stuff coming out of the insurance industry, especially in Insurtech, right? There's this. I was talking to a gentleman who did satellite imaging, and he basically uses satellite imaging for basically determining flood damage value, without ever visiting, right? So they use the satellite imaging, and every inch was $25,000, he said. So when a person's house is flooded, every inch they would pay $25,000, without ever looking at the house. And I thought that was pretty impressive. And plus, even just water monitoring system and Internet of Things. But can you share some of your views of some of the cool stuff you've been seeing in InnSure and obviously in the Insurtech world?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even go beyond Insurtech. So first of all, our model is, we like our engagement model is, like to say, connect, learn, solve. So we're often connecting corporates to startups to academia to investors and to the public sector. That's kind of our 5 stakeholders. Part of our kind of both event and our work with the universities is to educate people. Sometimes it's just educating people on what everybody else is doing. Sometimes it's educating people on specific things. And then solve is the like, what are the problems? How do we close the protection gap? How do we insure carbon credits? How do we do stuff like that? And you're right, there's so many startups, both in the Insurtech space. We're working with a company, Rick, which does parametric but micro insurance policies. And it's a really cool thing, because for like $15 a month, you can get $10,000 worth of rain coverage that just gets paid out within 24 hours if the rain goes over a certain number. And they've done some really cool things on the distribution side too, to say, instead of adjusting the price based on where you are, they adjust the rain depth trigger. So you can buy it now, just like you would buy anything for, like, on Amazon. Just buy now, $10,000, $15, and we'll tell you your rain trigger. So that's super cool.
That's really cool.
And then on the climate tech side, we're dealing with, like, one of the speakers at that event you went to is Vibrant Planet. Vibrant Planet is doing, like, using that satellite imagery and all sorts of data sources. They will get like tree level data from large Western forests, and they do all sorts of planning around the fire risk, the wildfire risk, but also how you can optimize it for usage by the people who get lumber out of it, but also optimize it for the carbon, like how it can be used to avoid carbon emissions. So those are really cool things, and they've kind of thought a little bit about insurance, but we want to find a way to work with them to say, look, we would love to be able to insure carbon credits, and using your data, your insights, your kind of approach to the world. They're primarily an environmental technology solution, which could be brought into the insurance industry.
Right.
Cool things around wildfire and other things. So
because we've been talking about water, but we're talking about the holistic approach of insurance and climate, right? We're talking about fires, we're talking about temperature, we're talking about flooding, the whole gamut of this impact of what's changing the world, even our ocean, our coral reefs, right? I mean, we had a really good conversation the other day about how you insure the coral reef. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that, Charlie?
Yeah. So nature-based assets, there's a lot of statistics out there that say natural assets really are significantly important to about 40% of the economy depend
Wow.
on nature-based assets. So that's like $40 trillion a year. But nature-based assets are not carried on anybody's balance sheets as an asset. So they're not really insured. And the oil industry actually does carry like reserves on their balance sheet, but the rest of the world doesn't. So if you think about Mexico tourism industry, they don't really carry the reef on their balance sheets as an asset that drives their revenue, even though the reality is they would lose a lot of tourism if that asset were to be damaged.
So let me make sure for our viewers, right? So you're saying insurance companies, natural resources like in Mexico and the barrier reef, that you're working on protecting that and having an insurance policy because 40%, or would you say 4 billion, $40 billion?
$44 trillion
$44 trillion
activity.
Wow.
Is dependent on natural assets. Think
about that isn't insured.
Yeah, that are not insured. And I'm not going to say, I don't want to take credit for this. The Nature Conservancy has done an insurance product where they said, hey, coastal community that heavily relies on tourism in Mexico, why don't you get together and work with us? And they work with an insurance carrier to create an insurance policy that said, hey, if the wind speed goes up above a certain number, so this is a parametric insurance product, we know that there's damage to the reef, and we know you only have about a day or a week to try to repair it, or else it becomes permanent. So they created a parametric product that insures the reef, and the cost of the insurance was shared by the coastal communities that rely on the tourism related to the reef. And what happened was there was a hurricane. The policy paid out within a couple of years, and the money was used within 24 hours to fund an emergency response, which actually put divers down to the loosened pieces of coral, kind of re-secure them before they died. So that's a huge success. It's insuring a natural asset.
So Charlie, are you telling us that the insurance industry are tree huggers now? That they're pro environment? Is that what you're really saying? Because it goes back. Yeah, they should. Right. So your argument really is the fact that the insurance industry, with their data, with their capabilities, can influence and persuade other industries to protect themselves against climate and help the environment.
It's in their best interest. I'm a tree hugger. I am proud of that. I've always been environmentally conscious, but it's not just about doing good for the sake of, because I want to be a good person.
Right.
There's the UN suggests that there's going to be $5 trillion a year spent on climate. If you think of just 2% of that, the insurance industry, the P&C part of the insurance industry is 2% of the economy. That's $100 billion of kind of new business. And we have a long list of things that can be insured that haven't been insured, or that need to be insured, or that new approaches to insuring could create new markets. And we're excited to, I don't understand why the insurance industry keeps trying to fight over grabbing the insurance from another company to insure that same car the same way.
The pie is big enough for other things.
Blue oceans.
Expand that pie, right? Because you're talking about doing well by doing good, right? In this world that we need to all live in. But let me ask you a question, because I asked you the other day, and I just want to ask it again for our viewers here. Do you think that climate change is a fad, or do you really think this is something that's going to last? That people are really interested in doing things, because we all live together, we all drink the same water. I was reading something the other day that don't, as kids, living in New York City, when it was rain, we open our mouths and the water would come in. They say, don't do that. All the rain is now poison in a sense, right? You have to filter it, right? So with all the stuff we've been talking about insurance and about climate change and the environment and all this thing, do you think this is just a fad, or do you think this is going to be around for the next 20, 30 years?
I think it's going to be around for the next 20, 30 years. And just let me throw out, I probably throw out too many numbers and stats, but back in the 90s, you would have $50 billion a year in catastrophe losses in the late 80s and the 90s. That was like all the cats kind of added up, and Andrew was like a peak and went over that. But like Ian, the one thing, it was at least $100 billion, and it might end up being 200 billion in economic losses for one storm. So you're just seeing, like, if you look at and I should have brought a chart, I would have some things, but the trend, the size of the losses, the frequency of the losses, it is going up. And it's not just like, hey, let's do this. There's reason to do this. That isn't going to just kind of abate. So I think it's going to go the other way. Sorry about that.
Yeah, because like even like when you read annual reports, right? There's the social, there's an environmental governance, but this big social piece and also the environmental piece is truly could be influenced significantly more by the insurance industry, right? And you're really at InnSure trying to be the pivotal person about this, right? You're trying to lead the way in telling the insurance companies that there's more we can do. And this is a huge opportunity, multi-trillion-dollar opportunity as per the UN that we should start preparing for.
I think so. I don't want to say we're the only one leading the way by
Sure,
no means.
but
A lot of companies are leading the way, but we are one of the few organizations that we are just uniquely, this is our focus: innovation, insurance, and climate risk. And that's what we do day in and day out. And we can work with a lot of the corporate industry players that are already doing great stuff, and the ones that are just kind of looking around trying to say, we should be doing more and we don't know what to do. We can help them as well.
Well, how do people get involved with InnSure? I know Oz Digital Consulting is a partner. We love working with you. But how do other people who be listening to our podcast, like, how do they get involved in this movement? Let's say, for you being an InnSure nonprofit in the focusing on industry within the insurance business, the government, educational institutions, and companies like Oz Digital Consulting in the private sector.
There's a lot of ways to get involved. We have individual memberships. We love individuals. We think we think a lot of the kind of rank and file staff are kind of further ahead on this kind of mission than sometimes in some companies the management. So we want individuals to engage and volunteer or join for an individual membership. We also want to work with corporates, and we work with corporates in different ways. And what we like to say is, usually every discussion involves kind of somehow to align money, ideas, and talent around some sort of initiative. And we're doing this stuff with you guys. We're super excited to get into some of the data. How can data better support some of these carbon transition things, and how can we use the Oz Digital expertise to help us build data programs and initiatives that can support the industry, looking at what an exposure is a little bit differently, thinking about the carbon footprint things. So
yeah, I mean, the partnership, we're really excited. The whole organization is excited at the board level and the C level and everyone within the organization, because what Oz brings is all that technical background, that data background, the cloud background, the innovation background, the digital transformation background. So, and we see, as we stand up our insurance practice, the idea of combining this with climate and learning from you and your group at InnSure to really partner with you and even partner with your future Insurtech idea, where Oz Digital Consulting could really bring that technical mindset and make this, a reality. Make these visions a reality with our expert digital transformation assistants, and our data people are unbelievable. So this is why we see this as a great, great partnership. Plus, it just so happens that Oz is in Florida, and the hurricane came. We could do a lot of work together, working with the state of Florida, or even the state of New York and California and Texas. All these huge areas just got hit with all the climate issues, right? I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity for us to kind of tap into your expertise,
Mhm.
and kind of all these things. These are not, some of them are not easy problems. So
Right.
it requires kind of a lot of different resources to come together. And
Mhm.
the things that you just kind of rattled off that you guys do so great is super important to that kind of
Mhm.
task. And so we're always looking for, how do we connect you with somebody, the carrier, or some, public
Sure.
entity that is trying to manage their community risk. And a lot of what we're doing is coalition building
Mhm.
around how can we create a new venture that provides a new product or service that
Mhm.
really solves not just somebody's business problem, but creates a business opportunity and solves some sort of societal problem around some of
Mhm.
these climate issues.
Excellent. Charlie, before we wrap up, any last words? And tell people how they can get in touch with you and how they get in touch with InnSure.
So you can get in touch with me. I'm Charlie at insure.org, two N's, INNSURE. Shoot me a note, and we're happy to kind of jump on a call and do an introduction. You
Sure.
can also get to me through Paul and the team at
Sure.
Oz. I would just say, like, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of kind of information swirling around that's tough to digest around some of these climate issues. But just know that there's both challenges and opportunities that can be overcome. I'm certainly not pessimistic that we can't overcome these. It's not going to be easy. And it's going to be a lot of opportunity for a lot of people that kind of try to figure it out now.
Charlie,